Acknowledge that some of us are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe and Huron-Wendat people. Word Up is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So welcome everyone to Word Up. Today we have Candace James Dorsey and Ursula Pflug. We're going to start out with Candace, who is the internationally known and multi-award winning author of novels Black Wine and Paradigm of Earth, upcoming mystery series, The Adventures of Isabel, and upcoming YA novel, The Story of My Life. 4 poetry books and several anthologies, edited and co-edited, including Food of My People, to name just a few. She is a community activist, advocate, and leader who has won 2 human rights awards and served on many community boards and committees for working with, working for neighborhoods, heritage, social planning, and human rights advocacy. So, busy lady, we're very happy to have Candace Jane Dorsey read for us. Everybody welcome Candace.
Welcome, Candace.
Welcome, Candace.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to be reading with my buddy Ursula, who is also my co-editor on this upcoming Food of My People anthology, which is just awesome. And of course, with COVID, publishing schedules have gotten a little pushed. So it's gotten moved to a spring date, we think, we hope. But I thought that in honor of it, I would read from a story of mine, which is called The Food of My People. And it's actually the story that precipitated the anthology. And it's also collected in this book of mine called Ice and Other Stories. But Ursula and Colleen Anderson bought it for an anthology they did called Playground of Lost Toys. But every time I read from this, people will come up to me and they'll talk to me about the food that was served in their childhood, comfort foods. And so we were both at International Conference on the Fantastic in the Arts, and we were talking about how, well, Ursula saw it happen. I mean, she was at a reading and saw this happen, and we said we should edit an anthology of speculative fiction on the theme of food and sharing food. And that's indeed what has happened, and it's got an awesome lineup of authors. I'd like to acknowledge, following up with Linda's acknowledgement, that I'm sitting on Treaty 6 territory. And that's traditional, the whole territory is the traditional home of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Blackfoot, and of course Métis people. But where I sit exactly was the home of the Pappas Chase people, and I also sit in Edmonton, which is has the largest number of Inuit people south of the 60th parallel. So so that's the treaty I honor, and I mentioned, I mean, I acknowledge this, but I also start with this mention because for me, I've often been troubled with how much fantasy authors like to incorporate other people's mythologies in their fantasies. So they hear a really cool mythology, like the Wendigo story, and they decide I could write one of those without really thinking about whose history it is, whose mythology it is. And so, you know, there's an ongoing discussion about whether or not it's voice appropriation to do that. And some people say, well, we can write about whatever seems important to us. And I do tend to agree with that. But also, if we are appropriating mythologies, cultural histories, and stories, are we just continuing an exercise in colonialism that started a long time ago? And so it's a very fraught situation, and was never ever simple. I mean, the Treaty 6 was signed in my territory in 1873, which was the exact same year that the Indian Act was passed in Ottawa. I can just imagine the people who worked so hard to create Treaty 6 hearing about the news from Ottawa and going ballistic, because it was completely antithetical to their respectful efforts to treat with another nation. So I'm thinking about respect, and I was actually asked to contribute a story to an anthology called Mojo Conjure Stories, which came out a very long time ago, which shows how slowly I write. And it was to be about everyday magic. So I began to think about what's the everyday magic of my people. I'm a third, fourth generation settler on the prairies. On the prairies, settler culture has two kinds of family reunions. There's the pierogi kind and the jellied salad kind. And sometimes they overlap a little. And I'm in the jellied salad kind. So I started to think, what's the magic of my people? Well, it's some jellied salads and craft dinners and other ceremonial foods of that sort. It's crocheted afghans and legs pantyhose and jigsaw puzzles. So I wrote this story about my kind of everyday magic, and so here's just a little segment of it. The protagonist is the little girl. Everybody calls her Reenie, but her real name is Renee. Her dad's in the burn unit of the hospital after a rig accident, and her mom's working at the dollar store. So the next door neighbor, whose name is Cubby, takes care of her after school. So the first day that she gets there, that day, Cubby said they were going to put together a jigsaw puzzle. Renee had never seen a jigsaw like Cubby's before. Cubby showed Renee a box with little bits of picture jumbled up inside, with some of the pieces upside down, and some of them with their little stubby fingers all tangled up with each other. Then she showed the lid and said how the jumbly bits all fit together and made that picture that was on the lid. The whole idea was amazing to Renee. How did she get almost all the way to the age of 7, without hearing about this thing? Don't you have them at that school you go to, Cubby asked. Renee tried to explain about the kind of jigsaws in a school, with only 10 or 26 pieces, made of wood, no box with a picture on, and educational. Now, don't look so sad. Ain't your fault the school is kind of backward, Cubby laughed and jiggled. Those ones are what regular people do, not educational so much. So time goes on, and she does a couple of jigsaw puzzles, and then her dad takes a bit of a turn for the worse. And her mom, Lori, comes over to Cubby's for dinner one day, and she's feeling a bit down. And they're eating together. When it was time, Cubby let Reenie set the table. She put the pink plastic placemats on the yellow arborite of Cubby's kitchen table and carried 3 sets of knives and forks. Cubby called them silverware, and they were brighter and paler than the knives and forks Lori and Reenie used, which came from the dollar store where Lori worked. Then they all sat down and ate crepes. They were basically to pancakes what Lori was to Cubby, and then with stuff all wrapped up in them. They were good. Reenie's named after her daddy, Lori said between bites. His name is Renee too, but without the extra E at the end, but everybody calls him Ren. Reenie didn't know that. She sat very quietly. Ren's in the burn unit over at the university hospital. He got caught in a blowout. He was lucky. The other 3 didn't make it. Reenie didn't understand that. Like I didn't make 3 questions on my arithmetic? It's not what I meant, hun, said Lori. What did you mean? Lori looked at Cubby. Finally, she said, means they were too badly hurt, sweetie. They died. Reenie didn't ask out loud. Was Ren going to die? The next day, after school, it was time to choose a new puzzle. Reenie was looking at the pictures, and she was trying to choose between some dogs dressed up in people clothes and playing a game, and Where's Waldo, when Cubby came up and sat behind her. I think you should start on this one today, she said, reaching up to a higher shelf in the puzzle closet. She handed Reenie a puzzle box that had 1,000 pieces printed on the side. That's a lot of pieces, said Reenie. 1,000, said Cubby. But if you put your mind to it, you can do it all right. The picture on the box was of some people working. There were a lot of pipes and rails around them. A lot of the puzzle was different colors of gray. Looks hard, said Renee. It is hard, said Cubby. If things were different, maybe you could work up to it slower. But from what your mom said last night, we don't have that kind of time. Can you help me? Cubby shook her head. No, honey, I've got a different way of doing my bit. Besides, if I helped you, it wouldn't work, and you don't want that. I guess not. Trust me, honey, that's the right answer. Just start the way I showed you with all the edges first. It's just one piece at a time, just like the other ones. Renee worked on the jigsaw all the rest of the week. The edges of this one were just as hard as the middles of other puzzles. By the end of the first day, she hadn't even found all the edge pieces, and the part that she had found and put together didn't join up. It was hard. When Laurie came, Renee went home dispiritedly, and after their dinner, which was bologna and cheese sandwiches because Laurie was tired, Renee did her homework. The next day was rainy and gray. When Renee got to Cubby's, Cubby put her into a big t-shirt of Cubby's and put all her clothes in the dryer. Then she turned on all the lights and brought a special lamp to shine on the puzzle table. But even with that, Renee could only seem to do gray pieces. She couldn't find one piece of her daddy or any of the other people. It's hard to make sense of the dead, said Cubby. It takes energy. So Renee worked on the pipes and railings and tank in the background. When she went home, she watched TV with Laurie and fell asleep on the couch. Laurie had to wake her up to get to bed, which was the wrong way around. When she was in bed, in the gray darkness that was never quite black because of all the city lights, Renee couldn't sleep for a while, worrying about stuff. The next afternoon, as she sat down to the puzzle table, she saw the piece with the eyes right away. They were just a bit like how her daddy's eyes looked when he smiled down at her. She reached out for the piece. It felt warm. She knew it should go right in the middle. She knew she should finish the border first, but instead she placed the eyepiece in the middle of the felt and looked back into the box. She remembered the pink pieces of the other puzzle. Would pink pieces in this one be easier to find? Most of the pieces were gray and brown and black. Skip a little while she learns to turn the puzzle pieces out on the table and turn them all right side up. As she did, she looked for the pink pieces. Well, not really pink, but face color. The people in the puzzle had lots of different face colors, from brown to almost white. She put all those pieces over on the left side of where the middle of the puzzle was going to be, where she had put her daddy's eyes. After a bit, she noticed she could also sort the other colors into color families at the same time. So she went and did that. This took a long time. She was getting tired. She sat down and sipped her lemonade. 2 chocolate chip cookies on a plate had appeared on the other bridge chair while she wasn't looking. So she ate one while she looked at the face pieces. After the cookie was done, she reached out and finished the man's face. The more she looked at it, the more she thought he looked like her daddy. Then she realized that the green pieces were the color of his shirt. She remembered that shirt from before the accident. He had more than one, and he wore them to work. She realized for the first time as she worked on the puzzle that there was a patch with his name embroidered into it, Renee, sewn on just above the left pocket. The other people had green shirts too, with name patches, Sam and Nadine and Jeff. Their faces looked sad to Renee, even though they were smiling. Were they the ones who didn't make it? Were they sad because they were dead? Maybe it was Renee who was sad because they were dead. She would be sad if her dad were dead, that's for sure. She's right patient, that one, said Cubby. Renee? Said her mom. Renee hadn't noticed her come in, but she couldn't stop now. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to make sense. Laurie picked up the cookie plate and absently ate the cookie while she started looking for edge pieces. Renee kept doing the middle. Were Jeff and Nadine and Sam friends of Daddy? Renee asked as she worked. How do you know that, baby? It says on their shirts, said Renee. See? Yes, those are a bit like the Rig Company shirts, Laurie said. But these are blue. Green, said Renee. Oh, so they are, said Laurie. After their tuna melt and soup, Renee went to bed early all by herself. She was so tired. Next day was Friday. Rena was still so tired when she went to school that she fell back, and Laurie had to tell her 3 times to hurry up. Why on earth was she such a slowpoke? She drooped through the whole day, and when it was her turn to answer, Madame had to ask her twice. When she got home, she went to Cubby's as usual. When Rena came in, Cubby said, "What's your daddy's favorite kind of pie?" "Saskatoon," said Renee. "Why on earth?" "While you're finishing that jigsaw, I think I'll bake me a Saskatoon pie. You and your mom and I can have a piece when she comes to get you tonight." That hurt. "Can you come talk to me?" "Pie's kind of labor intensive. You got to pay close attention. Guess that's the same for you too, eh, Mashu? You just work away there and I'll work away in here." When her mom came to Cubby's door, Renee didn't hear the knock. She was deep into the pieces of her daddy. When Cubby called her for supper, Renee had finished all the face and his left arm, but his right arm was only half there and the legs weren't done. Cubby had added extra macaroni and extra grated cheese to a Kraft dinner to make it stretch, and had cut one of the Saskatoon pies for their dessert. Renee could hardly concentrate on finishing her Kraft dinner for the enticing smell of the pie sitting there above her dinner plate, but she was good and ate every bite of the macaroni first. "You can't keep coming over here to eat," Laurie said. "We'll eat you out of house and home." "I can't make dinner for my friends now and again. It's a pretty poor home," said Cubby comfortably, clearing the macaroni plates to the counter. "Keep your fork for the pie." Renee licked every bit of cheese off the fork before she took the first bite of pie. Usually she liked to start at the crust end and work her way down to the tip, which being the best part she saved for last. But today, she very slowly and carefully lined her fork up across the tip so it was perfectly even, and gently pressed. The triangle that tilted onto her fork was as perfect as she could make it. She put it into her mouth and it melted on her tongue as if it were something else besides pie, something like air or water or blood. "You should go home right after I help you with the dishes," said Laurie. She was eating her pie the same way, slowly and gently. "I'm sure Renee has homework." Renee felt the puzzle call and she almost protested, but before she could, Cubby said, "Let her bide for tonight and work on her puzzle. She's that worried about her dad." "I am too," said Laurie. After the last bite of the Saskatoon pie, Renee remembered to ask to be excused before she got down and went back to the puzzle on the bridge table. She put 3 or 4 pieces in fast, and Laurie came and helped her a bit with background, then went off to the kitchen to dry dishes for Cubby. There was a really hard part on her dad's right leg that wasn't coming clear. Renee looked through all the pieces that were left. There weren't that many, so she was sure that what she needed wasn't there. "Cubby, there are some pieces missing." "Just look in the box," Cubby said. "Maybe they got stuck in the corners. Look in the lid, too, and check if they fell on the floor." Renee found 2 pieces stuck in the side of the box lid where it had split a little, and one sticking up from the pile of the shag carpeting right by the fern stand beside the puzzle table. That almost did it. Then she found the one with the right thumb on it, on the floor, way over under the coffee table. How did it get there? She imagined it scuttling over on its little puzzle feet while they were having dinner. She giggled as she turned it all 4 ways. There, it fit. That was for the hand and legs. That was it for the hand and legs. There were only a few more pieces. Renee sighed with relief. The puzzle was done. Then she blinked at Laurie and Cubby. They were sitting on the couch watching TV. The clock above the couch had both hands pointing to the 9. That was wrong. That was 15 minutes past her bedtime. Renee was suddenly silent. She walked over and sat by her mom, leaning against her shoulder. "My goodness, kiddo, we better get you home," Laurie said. Renee was so sleepy that her mom tried to hoist her up, but then said, "Oof, you're too big, baby. You have to use your own feet." "Take the rest of the pie," said Cubby. "Have it for breakfast." Renee giggled at the idea. "Nothing like Saskatoon pie to round out a healthy breakfast," said Laurie. "Why not? Wren loves this pie more than almost anything." "Except for you two," said Cubby. They did have pie for breakfast. The phone rang while they were eating it. Laurie came back from the call grinning. "Put your coat on, kiddo," Laurie said jubilantly. "We're going to see your daddy. He took a turn for the better last night, and he's awake and asking to see us." She hugged Renee. Cubby was on her porch, hanging out her delicate wash on a wooden rack that unfolded like an accordion. Cubby, we're going to see my daddy, said Renee. Cubby hugged Laurie, then Renee, and left her hand on Renee's shoulder to hold her back as Laurie started away. You did well this week, she said quietly. You made the pie, said Renee. You did well, Cubby repeated. Your daddy's going to be fine now. You can stop worrying. Hurry up, Renee, or we'll miss the bus, Laurie called, and Renee ran. That's her first piece of heavy magic, and more comes later. It's I have to say, that story continues to move even me, and I've proofread it a lot of times. I think there's a moment at the end where I think, oh, that's one of the stories I know.
Tim Powers had a thing where he said, I forget about which piece it was, but he said all my cylinders were firing on that one.
Yeah.
And the first time I read that Food of My People, that's definitely how I felt. So I should say that the story it was for the publication it first appeared in was an Exile publication that I co-edited with Colleen Anderson called Playground of Lost Toys. So, and the Food of My People that Candace and I have been working on for several years is also coming out from Exile. And it was Michael Callahan who recommended us for this series. So I'd like to thank Michael. And our first thought was to have readers from the anthology, but now since it's been postponed till April, it made more sense for us to read and also chat about the book a bit, which is available for pre-order on Amazon.
It is.
But I just, when you read for an anthology, there's this really big maybe pile, which most things are in, and there's really only a few stories that the first time you read them, you go, that's a yes, we have to have that one, and I'll fight for it. And if my co-editor says she doesn't like it, I'll threaten to walk away, and so on. And they're the stories that give you shivers. So Food of My People was definitely one of them, and it's pretty exciting that there's a whole other book coming out in its honor.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, because when you're writing it and you feel it click like that, you sometimes wonder, like, where did it come from?
Yeah.
Where does that? How does that all fit together so beautifully? And it goes click, and you think it couldn't have been any other way. And yet there you were, just typing away, slowly, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then then it just goes. It's like those. I don't know if anybody else had these movies in science in school where the universe, like the planets were all kind of whirling around, and then all of a sudden they go boom, and there was the planet in space, and it was like the globe of Earth or something. It's that moment. And
all
there
the
it
time
is.
for me. Yeah, a lot of my best ideas come from dreams, or me lying in bed not wanting to get up and then kind of floating around in my own head. So when do your big ideas come to you? Like an idea like that?
Sometimes dreams, sometimes when I'm in the bathtub, sometimes when I'm typing. Like I'll sit down to type, and a thing will come out that I don't totally expect. The first line in Black Wine, my first novel, was written actually quite late in the process of writing the book, but I'm sitting down to type, and suddenly I'm typing this line. There's a mad woman in a cage in the courtyard. I'm thinking, what? That's nothing to do with the story, but luckily something in me said, it fits somehow, persevere. So I kept typing, and in the end, that ended up being the line that begins the book. After I, rearranged things about a dozen times. And so if I hadn't gone with it, but it just came as my fingers started to move. That was what came on. And you think, I truly believe that so much of what we have in our minds is happening behind the conscious self. And it's like all of that stuff combines in ways that we don't predict, because our full brain is wiser than our conscious brain. And so as writers, sometimes you just have to get out of your own way.
I completely agree with you, Candace. And I know there are writers who will, chart out their work with describing all of the scenes before they begin. But one of my favorite parts is being surprised and having those wonderful moments that you weren't expecting, where you feel like somebody who's a little bit smarter than you are came up with that.
That's right.
So, and to me, that's the complete magic of it. So, is there anything else that replicates that feeling? I don't think so. And if I was the kind of writer who knew what was going to happen in every paragraph before I began it, I'm not sure I would have that experience.
But I have known writers of the chart kind, and the moment when their chart just blows up is kind of an analogous moment, where they've been writing along and everything's gone according to plan, and sometimes it's like a third of the way through or 2/3, the whole thing just goes boom, and the chart doesn't apply anymore because the story has so much critical mass that it's taken over. And I have to admit, as a person who writes for Discovery, there's a part of me, a little bit of Schadenfreude, that says, "Ha, your chart only works so far." But I also recognize that when I started writing novels, there was a moment where I had to stop and think about the structure of what I was doing too. So it's like one of those graphs that goes like this, right? And we all often end up in the same place. And you can't always tell by reading a book whether it was written one way or the other way.
No, I think it's especially important with fantasy and science fiction as well, that even if you don't do all your world building before you begin, you're going to have to do it at some point, or things will get muddy. Yeah. And it's something Ursula Le Guin said, was that your magic system has to be consistent. You can't, deviate from the rules, or you'll just confuse your readers. And I suppose that's why New Weird was invented, was for people who didn't want to stay inside the lines.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even to that extent.
But I also think, and I teach a lot of writing classes, and I think that writers will underestimate what they know. I mean, before a would-be writer has written a sentence on the page, they have been immersed in story for their whole lifetime.
Absolutely.
And you know that, like you know how. I mean, you know when you hate a book because it's not. The story isn't doing what you know it should do. You know when you hate a movie and you just want to walk out because it's or that moment, when it's supposed to be a big mystery, but you already know the answer. I mean, my partner is probably even more like this than I am, but it was like a minute into The Sixth Sense, and he knew what was happening. And afterward, I said, "Well, how did you know?" He said, "Oh, I just knew," and I made him think. And it was all the cues in the story that you're meant to look back at later and say, "Oh, I should have known." But he already saw them.
The foreshadowing. Yeah. He was able to do the math.
Yeah. And so, and I'm not giving it away in case somebody hasn't seen it even at this late date, but I think that is the main thing. And when I talk about getting out of our own way, I think it's the main thing I say to beginning writers is, you know more than you think. So try not to do much thinking. Just type, just write, just do however, because what you know will become more obvious, and people are often surprised at how well their stories come together when they're feeling all insecure about just starting as writers. But even experienced writers, we're always in our own way, and I think the writing struggle is not so much about the quality of the sentences, it's about how do you get the sentences out of you in the first place? You know, even after all these years.
I had a student who came to class one day and said, so I was filling up my car, and instead of talking to the attendant about what I was doing, I started speaking in the voice of one of my characters. And then she looked at me and said, is that normal? And what she meant was that her train of thought was so powerful that some of it came out, breached into the real world. And I said, Fern, you're a writer now.
Yes. Well,
so
Dickens.
She was describing that moment where the story becomes so powerful that you're eating and sleeping it, and it's
and it has its own internal, as you said, internal logic, not just of the magic or the belief system, but the whole bundle of it, the world of it now is kind of self-propelling. With Dickens, there's a famous story about Dickens being with a friend and crossing the street to avoid this woman. And when he said why, he said, well, that's Mrs. So-and-so, and named a character from one of his books and said, I just don't want to talk to her right now. Right? And there they were, this total strangers walking down the street toward them. But no, that was, I don't know who it was, Mrs. Chuzzlewit or whatever. And you think, you know, so for him, his characters manifested very much in the real world. And I don't know that that happens for me the same way, but I always know what my characters would or wouldn't do without having to ask them, you know, I just know. And people will ask me about that. Well, how did you decide that? Well, they just did it because, you know, that's who they were and that's what they did. And that's lucky for me because it's one thing that I don't have to work out. So I can have my angst about other things, which I do. Anyway.
Well, I think the people who chart out every scene, and then there's the day that it's, I think often the characters that walk out of the map, that they decide they want to do something quite different from what you wanted them to do. And you can try and push them back into their box, but I think it's much more interesting to see what happens when you give them free rein.
Yes. Now, and speaking of which, since you've been complimenting me about this, finding the story, I have to say that to everyone that I think Ursula is one of the most practiced and inspired short story writers working today. I think her. I mean, I love your novels, Ursula, but I also think it's just an amazing amount of material that you're able to pack into a story, and so it unfolds in the reader's mind in such an amazing way. And there are a few writers that I've read like that. I mean, obviously Alice Munro was one, but Eileen Gunn is one. But I really think that you are one, and so I was glad to hear your reading from Seeds today, because if you are still, because that's,
I am, yeah.
you know, I actually can't work my way very fast through your books for real, because they have a lot of risks, and those stories always sort of send me off on trips through memory and trips through popular culture and trips through previous sort of lives and friendships and relationships, and just even relationships with objects like shoes, or, you know, it's just so that's my little tribute to you, because I think it's
Well, speaking of Ursula,
amazing.
maybe this is a good segue to
I think so.
Ursula Pflug, who is an award-winning author and editor of 10 novels, novellas, edited anthologies, and short story collections. Her fiction has appeared in Canada, the US, and the UK in award-winning publications, some of which I listened to their podcasts, including Lightspeed, Fantasy, Strange Horizons, Postscripts, Leviathan, and Bamboo Ridge. Her books have been endorsed by Charles DeLint and Matthew Cheney. to name a few. Her short stories have been taught in universities in Canada and Italy, I believe, and she has collaborated across many creative platforms. Her fiction has won small press awards abroad and been finalists for the Aurora Relit and KW Hunter Awards. So everybody, welcome Ursula Pflug.
And I
Thanks.
apologize, Ursula, somewhere in your reading I'm going to deke out because
I
like
know,
an
yeah.
idiot, I booked two things too close together because it was my fault. I got messed up with the times and dates. And
No, I know you
so-
have to go. I just call it COVID brain now when things like that happen. And now that we're sort of on quasi-fall lockdown, I find that that's happening again. And somebody said something about co-regulation. There's a thing where babies who sleep with their mothers or their fathers, their breathing and heartbeat are synchronized with their parents. So it turns out that that's just one example. There's all these very subtle ways in which our physiology adjusts by proximity to others. And I feel like the reason that none of us can remember anything is because we're just not spending enough physical time together.
Yeah.
So thank you for what you said about my short stories. I was going to say that, you know, one of the reasons I think because I love writing novels, but there's something about short stories that are a little bit more magic for me, and I think it's that something about the way it unfolds that can be quite mysterious. And I think that also I put a lot of time into them, especially as a younger writer, because I had small children. So it was easier for me to get in and out. I felt like if I was working on a book, I would forget what I was doing by the time I had a chance to get back to it. So that's a bit of the why about short stories. So your next event is going to be hosted by Terry Favreau, who's a wonderful writer and person, and I hosted her at a reading series that I ran, and she's great. If you don't know her already, you'll really enjoy her.
It's going to be great, and Wab Bryce is going to be there too.
Yeah,
so
it's a great lineup.
I'm going to hang in for like another 5 minutes in the background and listen. So, but thank you everyone for inviting me and hosting, and Ursula for being here, and everyone for attending and listening. And
Well, thanks for coming.
yeah, you're so welcome. It was great. It was a great experience and
Yeah,
great
thanks.
conversation. Thank you.
Thank you too. So I'm going to read from Seeds. It's my third story collection. It came out from Inanna in the spring. I have also published several novels, but I have a particular love for the short story form. Most of the stories in Seeds have been previously published in Canada, the US, and the UK. But there are a few new ones as well. I'm grateful to Inanna for supporting this book, as there are prose poems and literary fiction with only very slight speculative aspects. So in that way, this book differs from my two previous collections, which include a little bit more commercial science fiction and fantasy, although I can't really call myself a commercial writer. The story I'm going to read is actually over 30 years old, which is kind of crazy. It's one of my very first published stories, and it appeared in this magazine, which was helmed at the time by Lorraine Fillier, who went on to be OAC literature officer. Some of you might know of her. The story is called Judy, and I chose it as it's about a pandemic. So in some ways, it reflects what we're going through now. I'll also be reading from this book again at the Inanna Fall launch on Thursday the 19th. If anybody would like to hear more from this book and also from our other wonderful authors that evening. So as far as the Indigenous territory. I don't have the land acknowledgement I usually read from, but we're in Williams Treaty territory, and the Williams Treaty was signed in 1923. And one year I had funding from Fourth Line, which is a local theater company, to develop a play with Peter Tassie, who was an Indigenous sculptor who lives in Burley Falls on Stony Lake on family land. And he wanted to create a play that was about how during the time of the Williams Treaty, his grandfather explained to the community the reasons why he thought it was actually a really bad treaty. And the people who agreed with him moved from the Curve Lake area to Burley Falls, which had been the traditional summer camp for the local Mississauga, but they started a permanent settlement there so that they could live outside of what were also the restrictions of the treaty. And many of them are still there to this day. So we had this incredible experience of driving the back roads together and speaking to elders and interviewing people who are probably no longer with us about, you know, working as guides for rich Americans on Stony Lake, and the stories that they would tell about their knowledge of the ecosystem were particularly mind-blowing, because it gave me an insight into Indigenous science, that what these people knew that was passed on was something that wasn't considered science, but is absolutely understood as science now, in the sense of the observation. So that was that's my land acknowledgement, even though I forget whether the Williams Treaty was, I think it was Treaty 20. Anyway, that's kind of a segue. But I will begin the story now. It's called Judy, and I'm going to read not quite the entire piece as, how long can I read for now, Linda? We're at 1:45.
I guess 10 minutes or so. Does that work for you?
I think so, we'll see. That was the summer all the non-smokers died. It was a hot summer, murderously hot. Everyone who had air conditioning kept it going day and night. So of course, the first thing they checked was Legionnaire's disease. Frank and I didn't have air conditioning, so we slept through the days with the fan on. And come dusk, we'd climb up on the roof with Judy, our cigarettes, a bottle, and Judy's dog, Hamilton. Hamilton didn't smoke and drink like the rest of us, but he survived that summer anyway. The tobacco fiasco, as it came to be known, turned out not to affect dogs, but we didn't know that at the time. Legionnaire's disease didn't pan out, and after that, we didn't know anything at all, and tried not to think too much about what we didn't know. That's why we spent so much time up on the roof getting drunk. Judy was up there with us, but she was thinking. Right after the tobacco fiasco got cleared up, we left for the East Coast to watch the whales die. It was a strange thing to do, drive all those miles to watch them die. It was Judy's idea. She said she wanted to document it. Document what? Frank asked, like she was crazy. We got to document it, she said, like we were crazy. We were, but we listened to her because she'd been right about the cigarettes. We listened to her, even though she stuffed the trunk of Frank's Volkswagen so full of camera equipment that we hardly had room for the tent. She'd done the same thing when all those people started dying. While Frank and I slept, Judy would be out there making notes and taking photographs. In the evenings, she'd join us on the roof, and although she'd already been up all day, she'd spend the night measuring her gathered data against each new theory that entered her head between jokes, cigarettes, and swigs off the bottle. We ran out of cigarettes around 4:30 one of those mornings, and it was Judy who offered to walk up to the 7-Eleven to pick up a deck. She explained that she was the least drunk of the three of us, and not to worry, she'd take Hamilton with her. They ran all the way home from College Street. Frank and I couldn't understand it. What with Judy's smoker's lungs? Even Hamilton was breathless by the time they got back up to the roof, and he's a big non-smoking dog. Judy waved the pack of cigarettes around like it was a live grenade. "We all smoke like forest fires till sunrise." She yelled it so loud she woke the neighbors, but Judy didn't care. She knew she was onto something. Frank and I were too drunk to dial the hotline we're too drunk to get excited, but Judy ran downstairs, cigarettes in hand, to dial the hotline to the Surgeon General's office. She read them statistics for at least an hour, and when she got off the phone, she came back out on the roof and worked on the second bottle with us. By the time it was finished, daylight had arrived, so we called it a night and all went downstairs to sleep. The headlines made the afternoon papers. Judy never did get any credit for it, except that people stopped dying. Tobacco prices rose faster than interest rates until the government got nervous and imposed sanctions. They knew it would look bad if people were spending so much money on cigarettes they couldn't afford to eat, never mind pay their taxes. After that, prices leveled off, but by then, every backyard in the city was planted in tobacco, and we were already halfway to the coast. They were huge, pale gray things, and they'd come moaning out of the sea in that white light you see only on the ocean at sunrise. Just when you thought you'd seen the last one, another would appear, its cavernous head lunging sadly for the shoreline. Judy would be there to greet it, embracing her tripod as though it was some strange prehistoric tree, counting the seconds till the shot was perfect. Frank and I walked out to the road after 3 days, leaving Judy on the beach with the bulbs, her cameras, and all those dying whales. She hardly saw us go. She didn't even notice when we took Hamilton with us. He's a carnivorous dog, but after 3 days, all those whale carcasses had him as grossed out as we were. We rented a Toyota in the nearest town and headed for Halifax, intending to get hammered. In Yarmouth, we stopped at the Yellow Dog Bar for a drink and directions. In spite of the name, they wouldn't let us take Hamilton in, so we left him tied to an elm outside. We got in and ordered a couple of drinks from Eddie. Eddie was the big friendly guy behind the bar. The second our drinks arrived, Hamilton began to howl like all get out. Eddie looked at us. He waited for the dog to stop howling. He looked at us some more. Finally, he jerked his thumb towards the door. "That animal out there belonged to you guys?" Frank and I looked at one another. We both got uncomfortable. We looked at one another too long. Frank looked at Eddie, saying, Yeah, it's our dog." "Then go outside and get it to shut up." Maybe Eddie wasn't such a friendly guy after all. Frank went. Eddie turned to me. "You guys aren't from around here, are you?" Around where?" I felt like a jerk. I found myself wishing Judy was here. She always knew what to say to guys like that. "You from the city, right?" I knew what he meant by the city. To guys like that, the city is the city. Any city, but especially the one we were from. Yeah. Hamilton hadn't stopped howling. "Are you sure that's your dog?" "What makes you say that?" "Well, it sure as heck ain't your friend's dog, because if it was, he'd have stopped howling by now. And if it was yours, I'd wonder why you're not the one out there." I sat, not saying a thing. Some bars are like that. "Let's see, you're from the city, it's not your dog. It makes me wonder. Another thing, what did you say you were in the neighborhood for?" "Oh, lie around on the beach, catch some rays." only one beach for miles around here, fella. And if you'd been there, you'd know it wasn't the kind of beach you want to do too much lying around on. And that's all I'm going to read for now. This is the book. Yeah, more open mic. I mean, more Q&A before the open mic. I always love listening to open mic readers, but I'm also very happy to answer any questions our audience members might have.
Great. Does anyone have any questions?
Sometimes no.
Well, I know we had some good conversation before you even started, so.
For sure.
I want to know what happens in the story.
I know, right?
So is the book you read from, is that out already then?
It is out. Came out in the spring, and it's, you know, COVID has just been so odd for publishing in general. So it was part of a Spring and Anna launch, but the platform was, we weren't using Zoom, but Crowdcast, and it can be a little bit glitchy. I shouldn't say that because there's also wonderful things about it, but so I wasn't able to connect that night. So I'm going to be reading at part of one of the Fall and Anna events on the 19th.
Of November?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I believe it's at 5, but 5 till 6:30, but that information is readily available.
Right. So how do you prefer short stories to novels then?
Well, I think that they are both wonderful in different ways. Short stories are less daunting because they have a beginning, a middle, and end. And there's a thing that Chuck Wendig calls the great swampy middle of a novel. So you can actually get lost in that swamp for a really long time. And it's not that there's no swampy middle to a short story, but because of the length, you have to find your way out of the swamp within 3 pages rather than 50. So
I love that.
yeah.
No time to get sucked into the swamp. You just sort of have to skirt along the top of it, and then you're off again, right?
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, I think I like that too. Except my short stories have turned into novels lately, so they just keep getting longer.
I had a period where all of my short stories were like 6,000 to 8,000 words long, and you know, people would say, "How are you doing that? That's not a marketable length." But I did end up selling them, and to kind of great venues, including Leviathan and I forget what the other one was, but I was in 2 of the Leviathans. But so. And I think that you also have to honor the work, right? So if the story says it has to be 7,000 words long, who are we to try and stuff it into 4? Because you might end up carving off some arms and legs that were really important, right?
Yeah.
That's my feeling anyway. Because, you know, people make decisions based on marketing that I think can also not be a credit to the work itself, because, you know, writers in Canada make so little anyway that it's really important, I think, to be true to your vision. And by that, I don't mean that you're the kind of writer who will say to the editor that every word is perfect and you can't touch it. I mean that, you know, you have to honor what you know is good work and not necessarily alter it for someone's ideas about how to make it more saleable when it is what it needs to be.
That makes a lot of sense. Because they're all looking for something they can sell. And sometimes we're just looking to share our big ideas or our thoughts or something meaningful.
Well, it's something else I say to students you know, that if you spend 2 or 3 years writing what you hope will be a bestseller, you'll probably be wrong, with all due respect, right? Like,
Mhm.
it probably won't be. So
Yeah.
you might as well spend the same 2 years writing the book you want to write the most.
Yeah.
And because that's an amazing experience. Like, I feel like you're a different person after you've written a novel, and that it's an incredible gift. So it should be the one you want to write, or the one, I often say, the one that wants to be written. They definitely seem to have almost a will of their own at a certain point.
That's a good way to put that. I like that.
Mhm. Do we have any other questions? Quiet group tonight.
Well, I sort of had a comment on the topic we were just talking about in terms of, so I write thrillers, and there's an exceeding amount of pressure in that world to, you know, to get them out quickly and to sell a lot of copies. And I honestly think in a lot of ways it's sort of a detriment to the stories themselves. Like, I just think there's too much pressure on the writers for speed and for saleability. And it's, I don't know, I think it's unfortunate. I think it takes away from a lot of the stories.
Well, I think it's also, you know, if we think about the books that we most like to read ourselves, they're often the ones where the amount of care that was taken is really evident, right? So, whereas the ones that I'm not going to say dashed off, except that I just did. So, so I definitely read for sentence level prose. Like, I want to be inspired by the language and not just flipping through pages to find out what happens next. And that definitely happens, I think, in the thriller world more, because it's very plot driven genre, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah,
Ursula,
I've read, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Ursula, who or what inspired you to begin writing?
Right. I think I'm one of those people who says they always wrote. So I was a super creative kid. I was always writing or drawing. And as a COVID project, I'm doing a thing that a few writers I know are doing, which is I'm creating 40-year-old journals and reading them. So I'm finding journals from my early 20s where I'm starting to think about what would it mean to be serious, and what would it mean to approach my writing in a different way. And so why did that happen when it happened? It's hard to say. I traveled a lot when I was really young, so I think that was part of it, was that I by then had a lot of really interesting life experience. And I don't think that that's essential, because I think that all lives are amazing, including very simple lives. But for me, that was part of the motivation, was a way to express some of what I'd experienced. Does that make sense?
It does, just to me. Any other?
Yeah, so I have a question. In terms of publishing your short stories, where did you go to find appropriate publications?
For marketing, right? Well, when I was starting out, people said, "Oh, you should submit to Canadian literary magazines." So that's what I did. And then when I started to write work that was more overtly fantasy and science fiction, I discovered that I could submit to American publications, that they had no prejudice against Canadian writers. And at that time, I don't think there were any in Canada, or maybe one or two. So I thought this was great that I could, without an agent, submit short stories to American publications as a fairly known Canadian author, and it would be read for content alone. So, and the way I found out about them, because it was actually just prior to the internet, was that there were newsletters you could sign up for. So I did that, and I would go through them and try and fit stories to markets. And I think now it's much different, that we can, all of that information is available online. And the point I still make that is really important is, you know, don't send things to Publish America, or there's a lot of vanity presses who will have all kinds of very clever marketing, who will say, you know, we want to include you in this amazing anthology, and it will, you only have to come up with however many $100, and so I always say to students, you're good enough to get paid. You don't have to pay to be published. So, and not that there's anything wrong with self-publishing, but if you're going to self-publish, then do it on your own terms. Don't do it through a third party, unless you're doing a book-length work and need help with design and typesetting and copy editing and all those things. And then there are a lot of small presses who do that as a service. And that's fine, because it's also a huge learning curve to learn all of that, as well as finishing your book. Does that answer your question at all?
Thank you. Yes, yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, and if I was going out looking to be published in a magazine or something, I wouldn't expect to be paying them. So I'm not my objective if I go out and do that.
Which is great, and I'm, you know, and that's the way it should be. I'm just surprised at how many beginning writers that's not clear.
Yeah.
So, but that's not why we're doing it, right? We're not going to get paid a lot when we get paid, but it's kind of the principle of the thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's, you know, I agree. I mean, would never expect to be making $100,000 in my short story, but you know, a couple pennies a word. But I'm not excited about paying somebody else to put it in something. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, there's something called Submission Grinder, where you can go and search all the different publications.
There's a few of, yeah, and Duotrope as well.
Some of them charge you to submit, and I kind of don't.
Duotrope? Oh, I've never used them. The one that I have used the most, although not so much the last few years, is partly because I was doing book-length work, is Ralan, and it's an R-A-L-A-N. But yeah, it's mostly for genre work, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. But he doesn't, there's no charge to authors whatsoever.
And that's a website, Ralan?
Yeah, Ralan,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I will look at that.
Yeah, it's great. And he divides it up between, there's pro markets, semi-pro markets, and and markets where you're not paid, but you're doing it anyway because it looks like a great project.
Okay, do we have any more questions? No, we're quiet tonight. So maybe what we'll do is I'm just going to make a little mention about our sponsor, and then if anyone has anything for open mic, we can do that next. Our sponsor this month is the Barrie Rotary. So we'd like to give our gratitude to them for sponsoring our authors. If you'd like to support them, visit barrierotary.com. They have been eradicating polio, alleviating poverty, building equality, and restoring peace since 1905. They continue doing their part. You can donate to their foundation at rcbcf.com, and you can help them do their part. So thanks to Barrie Rotary, and please contact us if you'd like to support the arts and our writers in the future. That's it for our sponsor. So
Good
do we
for
have
Barrie
anyone?
Rotary, though. That's wonderful.
I know, I got a nice last minute opportunity just last week, I think. So yeah, very happy that they want to support the arts with us. So
That's fabulous.
it is fabulous. Do we have anyone who wants to do an open mic reading? We usually do about 5 minutes, and when we're at like a physical location, we have people sign up, but we're not. So if anyone wants to read, just say something and you'll appear.
I hadn't planned on it, but I will.
Oh, excellent.
You'll have to time me, because since I haven't planned on it, I don't have a 5-minute spot to kind of stop at here.
Okay.
Okay, this is a short story called Daddy's Home, and it had placed a few years ago in the Can Write competition, an honorable mention.
Nice.
So Daddy's home. Carly bolted upright. The only light in the room was a thin white bar at the bottom of her bedroom door. Her limbs shook like cold, wet leaves in a November wind. She pulled her twisted sheet up over her clammy nightshirt and hugged the stuffed bear she thought she'd overgrown. When will the nightmare stop? She sank into the mattress. Her thoughts drifted uneasily. Neon filled her mind's eye as shapes took substance. An anxious voice called across the distance. Get out of here. I said leave. Now. I'll call the police. You don't need to call anybody. Please, Steve. You'll wake up the kids. Just go. Carly jerked up onto her elbows. She strained to hear. Another nightmare? The voices always seemed so real, but Steve, the judge said you couldn't come here. No judge can tell me to stay away from my family. This is where I belong. Carly clasped a hand to her mouth. My God, he's back. He's in the house. The coldness left her. A fire of fear and anger took its place. Putting aside her bear, Carly lowered herself to the floor, crawled to the bedroom door and listened. Have you been drinking? What if I have? A man's entitled to a drink now and then. Come here, I want to look at you. Stay away from me. Her mother's voice stern but trembling. Carly stood, back pressed against the door. Doesn't he realize how hard this is on Wendy? She whispered a prayer to her little sister. Please sleep through this. Wendy had been sent to the principal's office twice this month. When Carly got to the office a second time, Mrs. Smith explained that Wendy had hit another girl in her second grade class. Once in the office, she hadn't stopped crying and yelling for Carly. Carly had held her little sister and comforted her. I'm sorry, Wendy had sobbed. Anna said my drawing was silly. She laughed at it. I hate her. That's no reason to hit her. Just don't let her know it bothers you. If you don't get mad, you're the winner. Hearing herself say that had almost made Carly laugh. She sounded just like Mummy. But the laughter hadn't surfaced. I want Daddy to come home, Wendy had cried. Why can't he do that, Carly? Why can't he come home? Carly had caught a tear of her own before it dropped on her sister's soft brown hair. Her mother's voice jarred her back to the present. Steve, I'm warning you, you have to leave. Now, come on, I just got here. How about we have a cup of coffee and talk a bit? The counselor said we should talk things out. It's too late for talking. Get out. Carly heard the slap and her mother screech. She hid her face deep in her cupped hands. Get up and make my damn coffee. Carly watched the scene unfold inside her mind, a video that wasn't supposed to play anymore, that she believed would never be seen again. The judge's words had locked it away. Instead, it slithered out from a corner of her brain. She knew exactly what was happening in the front hall below her. Her mother would try to get up. Carly felt her mother's pain as he kicked her in the side. Now her mother would roll over and try to escape the next blow. Her blurred vision, or with blurred vision, Carly inched her bedroom door open. She had to get past the stairs without being seen. It seemed to Carly that she was always hiding now. She would have walked smack into him one day last week if her best friend Maria hadn't warned her. Track and field practice had just ended. He'd probably been out there the whole time watching her. Just the thought gave her the creeps. Carly, he's outside, Maria had said, breathless from running to catch her. My dad? What am I going to do? Go out the gym doors. My mom and I will pick you up in the parking lot. That time, Carly had escaped. Still, every week, he was somewhere, although never at the house. The judge had made that clear. He was never to go near the house. Carly peeked downstairs. Her mother was curled up on the floor. Her father stood with his back to the staircase. She ran past the top of the stairs, fighting back more tears. I'm going to see the kids, he boomed out. Move your lazy ass and get that coffee. Carly ran into her mother's room, certain her pounding heart could be heard throughout the house. Hey, Carly, I'm home. Wake up, baby. Daddy's come to see you. Down the hall, Carly's bedroom door creaked. She grabbed the phone off her mother's night table. It slipped through her trembling hands and hit the hardwood floor with a bang. Carly, where are you? Dropping to her knees, she grasped the phone and jabbed 911. Her father filled the open doorway.
Bruce.
Why? Oh.
Sorry, that's about, you're about 5.5 minutes, so.